Welcome to RC 101. Whether this is your first time picking up an RC car or you've been building, bashing, and upgrading for years, this is the video for you. Today we're going to cover the basics, the hidden details, and the little known tricks that even experienced enthusiasts overlook. We're going to be doing some interesting experiments, and since this is 50K, you know we're doing a giveaway. RC stands for radio controlled, meaning we're going to be controlling the car using a transmitter that has no wires connected to the car itself. And while many of us would consider this near mint rustler from the 1990s to be pretty vintage, Surface RC goes back way further than that. And while there were some prototypes that went all the way back to the 1940s, in 1966 an Italian company named Elettronica Giocattoli came out with a 1/12 scale Ferrari that was nitro powered. Back then the radios were very crude, single or dual channel, and while a few models came after that, we really didn't see serious production until the 1970s with Kyosho and Tamiya, which both made the first real hobby grade RC cars. Back then and all the way up through the 1990s, these were very simple electromechanically controlled electric and nitro vehicles, and they had nowhere near the durability of a modern RC basher. And although there will be some argument as to what constitutes a real basher, some of the first ones were the Traxxas T-Max and later its cousin the E-Max. While these trucks are very fragile by today's standards, they were really the first models you could get that you could jump and bash and not break every single time you landed or crashed into something. These days though, even something like this cheap Amazon Special is going to be more durable and probably more fun than anything from the 90s. And that's because modern technology and modern materials have come a long way since then. With that modern technology, however, has come modern dangers. And not only are we going to learn how to have fun in this video, but we're going to learn how to stay safe with LiPo batteries. Because these days, no matter what RC car you buy, it's almost certain that you're going to be working with a LiPo battery. And these spicy little boys can be very dangerous if they're not treated with respect and handled with care. With the exception of running a nitro, which I don't recommend for your first vehicle just because of the complication associated with them, or possibly some really low-end cars. If you buy an RC car today, it's either going to come with a LiPo battery or you're going to be buying a LiPo battery to go with it. LiPo stands for lithium polymer, and a LiPo battery is part of the lithium-ion battery family. And a LiPo battery is very similar to a lithium-ion battery, just with a slightly different chemistry inside. Regardless of what shape or size you get though, everything inside's pretty much the same, and these batteries have the ability to contain a ton of energy and to release that energy very violently if you're not careful with them. Before I show you exactly how to stay safe with these batteries, how about we have a quick demonstration of what happens if you're not safe with them. Okay, off camera I just engaged the Rapid Energy Release-O-Matic 9000. I'm not going to show you what that is because this is pretty dangerous, but we've got it hooked up to a small 2S battery just as a demonstration. As you can see from the thermal camera, this is already starting to heat up pretty rapidly, and we should see a thermal runaway in fairly short order with it. We don't always get a fire when this happens. Sometimes there's just smoke, but there's usually a pretty rapid energy release. I'm making sure I'm a fair, safe distance away. I'm zoomed pretty far in here. By the way, if you like seeing these kinds of experiments so you don't have to do them, make sure you get subscribed because we do these kinds of antics all the time on this channel. All right, things are definitely starting to heat up now. I suspect it won't be long before we have some sort of rapid thermal runaway event. I'm going to back off just a little bit more to stay safe. All right, she's smoking. Shouldn't be long now. It doesn't always catch fire, but it usually does. You can see, there it goes. Whoa! As you can see, that is a rapid energy dump, and that's what makes these things very potentially dangerous. Now that was a pretty violent and possibly scary demonstration, but here's the thing. The same battery you just saw outside is also inside your cell phone. There's a really big difference though. The lithium polymer or lithium ion batteries in consumer devices are protected behind a wall of electronics that stops you from doing anything stupid with them. With an RC car battery, there's nothing between it and disaster but you. And that's why we're going over LiPo batteries before we talk about anything else, because it's really, really important. Every LiPo battery is just a series of cells. This is a 6-cell LiPo battery. Basically, it's just 6 individual cells layered together like this. They are all wired together to this output, and then this is known as a balance connector, which connects an individual wire to each one of those cells. To clarify, not all batteries are going to have a balance connector. As you can see, this Spectrum G2 Smart battery just has the 2 main wires and a single wire in the middle. That's because all of the balancing circuitry is done inside the battery. Kind of similarly, Traxxas batteries don't have a separate balance connector, though they do have the balance wires broken out out here at the main connector, so they do still have balance wires, and they don't have any circuitry inside the battery. The only bit of circuitry they have is a little tag right here that can tell the charger what the battery is. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Each one of the cells inside these batteries have a minimum and maximum voltage. Typically, maximum cell voltage is 4.2 volts, and minimum cell voltage is around 3 volts. There's also something known as a high voltage battery. They have the ability to be charged just a little bit higher. They don't have to be charged higher though, so I'm not going to talk about that in this video. The most important thing to keep in mind though is that these individual cells need to stay between those two voltages. Going too high can cause an immediate thermal runaway and cause the battery to blow up, kind of like what we saw earlier. Going too low is a bit more insidious. If an individual cell in a LiPo battery gets discharged below around 3 volts, chemical changes occur inside the battery that allow copper to go into solution in the electrolyte. That copper can redeposit anywhere inside the cell, and that can cause micro shorts at any point in the future. There's no way to test for this, there's no way to fix it, and it makes the battery a fire hazard from that point forward. And this is why it's critical that if you have a cell get over discharged, you shouldn't try to charge it back up again. There are ways to do it, but don't do it. I know plenty of people are going to say they've done it and they've been successful, but plenty of people drive around without their seatbelts on all the time too. That doesn't make it a good idea. The capacity of the battery is in milliamp hours, and all you really need to know is the higher the number, the bigger the capacity. C rating is another number that's important to know, and the most important thing to know about it is that C rating is always a lie. Ostensibly, C rating is how many times the battery's capacity in amp hours, that's 7.6 amp hours, the battery is able to discharge. So in theory, a 75C battery that's 7.6 amp hours can output 570 amps, but that's very, very much not true. Some manufacturers like Traxxas are a lot more honest about their C ratings. As you can see, this battery says 25C. It's not 25C, but that is a lot closer to reality. One final thing to talk about with output is that the output is a combination of the C rating and the capacity. So a 5,000 milliamp hour 25C rated battery has twice the output capacity as a 2,500 milliamp hour 25C battery. We've got a few more really important things to go over with LiPos and LiPo safety, but first, this is a brand new Arrma Granite, and whether this is your first car or not, it's a pretty awesome choice. So what made me choose the Granite and not, for instance, this little Relarlo Omni Terminator? Well, there are a lot of options out there for cars, whether it's your first car or your 100th car, and how you're gonna use the car makes a big difference in what car you're gonna pick. For instance, this little Omni Terminator is doing okay in this fairly tall grass, but even it is struggling. If I picked a little buggy or a Grom or something like that, it probably would not do well in terrain like this. I think something like a 3S Granite is pretty versatile, but if you're only going to be driving on hard surfaces or on hard packed sand or dirt, a buggy might be a better choice. Now, there are a ton of other factors that come into play for what you should pick, especially as a first, second, or third RC car. We're going to talk about that in a little bit, but for now, let's go ahead and dig into that Granite. This truck is a 1/10 scale 4-wheel drive brushless monster truck, and I think it's basically the perfect representation of a modern basher. It comes on a very durable platform, is reasonably affordable, especially if you can get it on sale, has a full brushless system, stability control, and a center differential. We're going to be taking a deep dive into this truck in a few minutes, but just briefly to go over its basic features and the features it'll share with most RC cars. You have all of the electronics and then all of the mechanical parts. The electronics are going to include an ESC. This is the thing that takes power from the battery and powers everything else. That ESC, or electronic speed controller, is going to be connected to your motor, typically a brushless motor that will have 3 wires going to it. Sometimes they'll have fans, sometimes they won't. This has fans on both. It'll also be connected to your steering servo. This is what actually controls the steering through a mechanical linkage that's connected to the front tires. And then the car is driven through a mechanical linkage that goes to a front and rear differential that drives the wheels. This is the transmitter that comes with the Granite, and while transmitters come in all shapes and sizes, they have a few things in common. They pretty much universally use a wheel and a trigger to control throttle and steering. The wheel is very simple. You turn it to the right, the wheels go right. You turn it to the left, the wheels go left. The more you turn, the more the wheels turn. Same thing with the trigger. You pull the trigger, you get throttle. You push the trigger the other direction, you get brake. If the vehicle is stopped, when you push the trigger the other direction, you get reverse. Some electronics require you to double tap and hold to get reverse, this prevents you from going into reverse accidentally, but a lot don't, so it just depends on what vehicle you get. From that point on, things can get really complicated. This Radio Master transmitter has a ton of buttons, switches, knobs, and dials on it, but most RTR transmitters, like this one for the Granite, are much more simple, and there's not really much you need to know. Specifically for this Granite, this switch down here doesn't actually do anything. It controls an additional channel that isn't hooked up to anything on the truck. These 3 dials give you steering rate. Essentially, this is how much steering you get. Throttle trim, which adjusts the center point of the throttle. It's usually something you don't need to mess with on electric vehicles. And steering trim, which you can adjust to make the car go straight. If it's going a little bit to the left when you're not steering, you can give it a little bit of right, and vice versa. Additionally, on here, you have some switches. This switch lets you choose a throttle limit of 50, 75, or 100%. This is great for when you're just starting out. Then you've also got throttle reversing and steering reversing. These are things you might need if you change out the electronics or if they're set wrong from the factory. Additionally, on this transmitter is the power button. In this case, the power button also lets you adjust stability control. Stability control comes with a bunch of different names. Traxxas calls it TSM, Spectrum may call it AVC, but essentially it's an electronic device that helps you keep the car going the direction you want it to go. Most transmitters are powered simply by 4 or 2 AA batteries that go here in the bottom, and anything beyond that's probably going to be beyond the scope of this video, though depending on what kind of vehicle you're driving, crawlers and whatnot can have a lot more functions, and higher-end universal remotes can even work with multiple different vehicle models. Surprisingly, the only mainstream RTR remote that can also do that is the Traxxas TQi. Even though this seems very simple from the outside, if you add a Traxxas Link Bluetooth module, it actually makes it really fully featured with the Bluetooth app. But again, that's going to be beyond the scope of this video. Now I'm going to pop some batteries in this transmitter, and speaking of batteries, we need to pick a battery for the Granite. Unfortunately, battery selection can be very complicated. There's a ton of batteries out there, but you do have 2 easy solutions. First of all, if you're buying something like the Granite, just go on the Horizon website and buy the battery they recommend. It's not the cheapest solution, but it is the easiest. The other easy option is to buy an RC car that comes with a battery already. Counterintuitively, cheaper and lower end RC cars tend to come with a battery. This Relarlo comes with a pretty decent little 2200 milliamp hour 3S battery, while higher end cars don't usually come with batteries. If you do want to pick out your own battery, there are a few things you need to be aware of. First of all, is the voltage that's supported by the ESC. As you can see, this is a 3-cell battery. Like we talked about before, that's 3 individual battery cells in one case. That's going to be the maximum cell number that the electronics, primarily the ESC, can handle, but it's not the minimum. You could also run a 2S battery in this car or in the Granite. Beyond that, as far as specifications are concerned, you do want to pay attention to the C rating. There are some really low-end batteries that are only designed for transmitters that'll have really low C ratings, but in my opinion, the brand is more important than the C rating. I personally recommend SMC batteries. No battery company is perfect, but this is a US-based company, and they stand behind their products, and they make a good product. The market is flooded with cheap batteries, and at least in my opinion, those cheap batteries are partially responsible for some of the failures we see. Of course, this battery wouldn't fit in this car, so you need to make sure you get the right size as well, and you can do that just by measuring the battery compartment or looking up the specifications for it, and then making sure that the size of the battery matches it. The final thing you're going to need to know is the connector. We'll talk more about connectors when we talk about charging. What I really want to do though is take this beautiful new Granite out for a blast. Something I always do, and something I recommend you do, especially if you're new to the hobby, before taking the truck out for the first time though, is read the manual. These Arrma cars come with very good, very thorough manuals, and even if you've been in the hobby a long time, there might be features on the car or limitations that you're not aware of. Giving the manual a good once-over can really help you enjoy the car to its fullest. Now, the first time you go to drive a new RC car, whether it's your first RC car or your 10th, there are some things you're definitely going to want to do. First, you're going to want to see if it's going straight, and if it's not, you want to adjust your steering on the transmitter so it is going straight. That's going to help you out with everything else you're going to do. You also just want to kind of make sure everything feels good on it. Make sure it feels right, that there's nothing loose, it's not making any weird noises, and just slowly take your time and work your way up with it. I also recommend you start by yourself. Don't be around a bunch of other people, especially if you're new. That way you're not trying to impress people at the same time as trying to drive. When you're driving away from you, everything's really easy. As soon as you turn around and you're driving towards you, the steering gets reversed, but the throttle doesn't. So that's something you're gonna have to practice and just get better at. And that's the main thing I want to stress with driving a new car, especially if you're a new driver. That's just take your time, learn, and just get better as you go. You don't need to be in a rush. You don't need to impress anybody. You especially don't need to impress yourself. Just drive around, get comfortable going slow, and then slowly work your way up to going faster and faster. You can always start out with the throttle at 50% or 75% if that's what's more comfortable for you. And then you can just increase the speed and increase the power as you go. And then eventually you can work your way into getting into a jump. Now, jumps are kind of a different thing. You can start out with just a board and a block of concrete, a little jump like this that's designed for skateboards, or whatever you want that has a nice little ramp to it. But you just, again, want to start out slow and take your time. Just drive up the jump and land the jump like that. The best thing to do is to land the jump off of throttle. You don't want to be wholly on the throttle, especially if you're landing a big jump, because that puts a ton of stress on the drivetrain. Just let it jump, let it land, and get used to what that feels like. When you're in the air, you can have a little bit of air control by giving it more throttle to bring the nose up, or hitting the brake to bring the nose down. This is another one of those things that you just have to practice with. It's not gonna be something that comes naturally for most people. So just, again, start small, start by yourself, and just go out, have fun. Know you're gonna crash your car, because we always crash our cars. Although keep in mind that eventually it's gonna stop. And of course, the most common reason it stops is because your battery goes dead. There are obviously other things that can cause the fun to stop, and we're gonna dig into those in just a minute, as well as talking about some fun things like upgrades. But for now, we need to talk about this dead battery. And when I say dead, I don't mean completely dead, I mean depleted as far as a LiPo is concerned. If you'll remember previously, I said a LiPo is fully charged at around 4.2 volts per cell and is fully discharged at around 3 volts per cell. However, this discharge is not linear. The battery will maintain a fairly high voltage for a while, and then once it gets close to being fully discharged, it just falls off a cliff. So that means that about 3.7 volts per cell is 10% charged, and 3.6 volts per cell is 0% charged. Anything below that is essentially 0% charged. And again, like I said before, going too far below that damages your battery. Fortunately, your ESC or speed controller knows that it'll damage the battery, and it'll stop you from doing so. It has what's known as a low voltage cutoff, and that low voltage cutoff will either stop the car or slow the car way down and then stop it in order to prevent you from damaging your battery. So we have our discharged battery, now what? Well, we're gonna need to recharge it. Before we do that though, we want to inspect it and make sure it's not damaged. Bashing an RC car puts a lot of stress on these batteries, and physical damage is one of the things that could cause catastrophic failure. This battery is a hard case battery. They also come in soft case varieties. The hard case has a hard plastic shell on it, which helps protect those sensitive cells inside, and these are the ones I recommend you use for bashing, though it's not always possible depending on the vehicle. Regardless of whether you have a soft case or a hard case battery, you want to give it a good visual inspection when you're done bashing. Things like little scrapes and scratches on the outside of the hard case aren't a problem, but if you see a big dent in it, kind of like you can see the end of this battery squished in, that could be a problem. These batteries have very thin layers inside the cells, and anytime you see damage like this, it represents the possibility that those layers have gotten squished together, and if that happens, they could short out. This battery is actually junk, and I just kept it so I could show you in this video. Unfortunately, how much damage is an acceptable amount of damage is a completely subjective thing, and there's really no way to know if something like this is going to cause a problem or not. Extreme damage, of course, is obvious, but subtle damage usually isn't. I always err on the side of caution, though, because these things contain a lot of energy, like we saw earlier, and I personally think my house, its contents, and occupants are worth more than a $40 battery. You also want to inspect your wires, make sure there's no nicks or cuts in them, make sure your balance lead is intact and the connector's good on it, and a great way to ensure that your battery stays in good mechanical condition is to make sure it fits the battery compartment well and that it's properly strapped down, following the instructions in your manual. If you find there's a bunch of front to back free play, it's great to add a piece of foam in the back or the front. These batteries slamming around is how this end damage happens and is a really quick way to trash a battery. You also want to make sure your cables and connectors are well protected and out of the way of anything spinning or moving. Most of this car is shielded, but as you can see, the center drive shaft does spin, and if a connector got stuck down in there, it could get worn out or damaged. The final physical checks you want to make are if the battery is getting too warm during bashing, a little bit of heat is fine, but if it's getting too hot to touch, there's probably a problem. And then I think one of the most important physical things to check for is puffing. See how this battery's kind of blown up like a balloon? This means gas has escaped inside the cells, and anytime gas escapes like this, it is a sign of cell damage and a sign that the battery is warning you that it's failing. This early warning sign is something a lot of people ignore and something you really shouldn't ignore. Keep in mind though that this puffing is different from this physical damage. Puffing will always occur lengthwise in the battery like this, and usually at the top and bottom because that's how the cells are stacked up. If you see expansion on the end of a battery like this, that is physical damage from bashing and is almost always avoidable by properly mounting your batteries. This battery's passed all its physical checks, so now it's time to get it charged back up again so we can go out and have some more fun. LiPo chargers come in all different shapes and sizes, though there are definitely some that are better than others. For instance, these little USB LiPo chargers aren't that great. They do work fine. These are the ones that usually come with things like the Rolarlo Omni Terminator, but I don't think their quality control is very good, and they give you no way to monitor the health of the battery or what it's doing. The next step up would be one of these mini chargers. These are cheap and small and convenient, except the fact that they only accept a DC input. That means you either have to power them from another battery, or you need a separate power supply for them. Because of this, I don't usually recommend these as a first charger. What I do recommend is something like the iMars D300 or the Hoda S6. These both have built-in power supplies, are dual chargers so you can charge two batteries at the same time, and are powerful enough to charge large, modern batteries with plenty of features to keep you safe. These chargers will all come with manuals, so I'm not going to go over the basic operation of them, but there are a few things we need to cover that are really important. First of all, let's get our battery plugged in, and this doesn't fit, so now it's a good time to talk about connectors. RC vehicles, batteries, and chargers come with a multitude of different connectors, including the IC5 or EC5, XT90, QS8, Deans or T-Type, XT60, and more. The only thing you really need to know about this is that your battery needs to have the same connector as your car, and then you need to be able to adapt that to your charger as well. This is a connector adapter. It's one I made myself. As you can see, it has an XT60 on one end and an XT90 on the other end. The most important thing to keep in mind about these adapters is don't use them for actual bashing. In the best of times, they add a bunch of resistance to the circuit that it wasn't designed for, but the more likely scenario is you get a cheap adapter because these are usually made as cheaply as possible, and then when you put a bunch of current through it, like when you're bashing, you end up burning something up. Adapters are fine for charging, which we're actually going to use right now, but I would never recommend you use them for bashing unless you're making it yourself and you really know what you're doing. Before you plug in, as a matter of fact, before you bash, you also want to check the connector on your battery, adapter, charger, whatever. As you can see, there's a little bit of a burn mark on this, and that is a warning sign that there could be a problem with the connector. If you have loose or burned connectors, that can also cause you issues because it can create a bunch of heat through a bunch of resistance. What you do about that is kind of outside the scope of this video, but generally speaking, if you've got a problem with the connector, you probably want to replace it or replace the thing it's connected to. When plugging your battery into the charger, you need to make sure you plug in the main connector as well as that balance connector we discussed earlier. Different chargers will have different balance connector configurations, but just follow the instructions in the manual for the charger. And now we have that fully plugged in. The only exception to this is going to be if you have a G2 Spectrum Smart battery or a Traxxas battery. Neither one of those have an external balance connector, so you just plug in the main connector. Recharging your battery is fairly simple. All you want to do is look at the capacity of the battery. See how this says 7,600 milliamp hours? That's 7.6 amp hours. And the safest way to charge it is at 1 times its capacity. So we want to try to charge this at 7.6 amps. To accomplish that, we're just going to go into the menu. We're going to choose charge, LiPo, 4.2 volts, which is that maximum charge voltage. It automatically chose 3S for us. That's a 3-cell battery. We do want to verify that that's correct. And then we go to target current, and we're going to choose 7.6 amps. Once we verify everything's correct, we can hit start task, and it's going to start charging the battery. You can see the individual cell voltages here. That's what's coming through that balance connector. And now we just let it charge up, and it will stop automatically when it's done. While this is charging, we need to talk about one more thing, and it's probably the most overlooked thing with LiPo batteries. That is internal resistance. Most modern chargers will show you a screen like this that shows the internal resistance of each cell in milliohms. Without going too deep into it, this is how freely the battery is able to pass current through its internal mechanism. And a rising internal resistance is usually the first sign that a battery is dying from old age or even possibly damage. Unfortunately, most chargers don't really give you an accurate view of internal resistance, but they do give a consistent view. This means when you get a battery, you can check the internal resistances of the cells and then monitor them over time to check their health. If you see the internal resistance of one of these cells dramatically starting to rise, that means that cell probably is going bad and it's time to get rid of the battery. That rising internal resistance will often but not always this coincide with things like the voltage of one cell being higher or lower than the rest of them, the battery getting warmer than you'd expect it to, puffing, poor performance, or anything else that's just unusual about the battery. In my opinion, it's always better to be safe rather than sorry when it comes to LiPo batteries. If you start getting any of these early warning signs, it's time to get rid of the battery. I'll show you the best way to get rid of a battery in a little bit. But of course, there are a few other things that could cause your car to stop before you're ready. The first one would be an electronic failure. This ESC is designed to detect overheat, overcurrent, under voltage, and a few other things. There's an LED that blinks error codes. Those error codes are in the manual, so that way you can figure out what's causing the problem. Most RC cars don't have a temperature sensor on your motor, however, so if it starts to overheat, you might not know until it melts down. These fans are designed to protect from overheating, though they can often get filled up with debris and get jammed or just break. Overheating is something you really do need to be aware of, though with a stock system and a good battery, it's not something you really should have to worry about, but modern electronics are good up to around 180 degrees Fahrenheit, and you can check that with an infrared thermometer. The old finger touch test doesn't really work anymore because modern electronics can go way higher than old school electronics could, and too hot to touch doesn't necessarily mean too hot to run anymore. Of course, one of the most common failures when you're bashing is a mechanical failure, and to talk about that, we need to take this thing apart. In order to take the Granite or any RC car apart, you're going to need tools. Most RTRs are going to come with a basic toolkit. The Granite actually comes with nicer tools than a lot of cars you get, as for the most part, you're just going to get little L-shaped Allen wrenches and probably some type of four-way wrench to deal with the wheel nuts. In the case of the Granite, you also get a specialty tool that lets you take the shocks apart, but none of these tools are really great, and whereas most of the time they'll get you started, it's probably not something you're going to want to use long term. For the enjoyability and the ease of working on your car, I recommend getting some decent quality tools. I've been using MIP bits and other tools for a long time, and that's actually the subject of this giveaway. Here we've got a set of the MIP speed tips. These come in 1.5, 2, and 2.5 millimeter tips, and we've got a speed tip handle. Whereas there are definitely cheaper options for tools out there, they're not going to fit the screws as well, and it's more likely that they're going to get worn and end up stripping screws out, which gets very frustrating. I've been using their previous generation tips for a really long time, and MIP was nice enough to send me a set of their updated tips and handle, and we're going to be giving a set of these away to one of you guys. I'll tell you more about how to win that in just a few minutes. The 1.5, 2, and 2.5 millimeter tips are all you're going to need for most RC cars, though some larger cars will require a 3 millimeter tip. And when I say tip, I'm referring to the piece that's actually going to go in the socket head of the screw. This is a common 2.5 millimeter socket head screw, but the screw itself is actually M4 as measured by the outside diameter of the threads. An M4 screw won't necessarily have a 2.5 millimeter socket head, but it is the most common combination. Beyond that, one of these four-way wrenches is really helpful. It has a 17 millimeter hex on it, which larger 1/8 scale vehicles use for their wheels, and other commonly used sizes, and gives you plenty of leverage when taking nuts on and off. The Granite does come with a wrench for its wheel nuts, though it's not quite as convenient as this larger four-way. You can get these four-ways really inexpensively on Amazon, and they're all pretty much the same. Beyond a four-way wrench and a good set of hex bits, I recommend you have some sort of small pair of pliers. These are Knipex 86 125s, and they're really great pliers for RC, but you don't have to go this expensive. Speaking of pliers, a set of shock pliers are a great tool to have. Again, these aren't very expensive. They're made of aluminum, and they allow you to grip the shock shaft to remove the bottom and top without marring the steel finish. A lot of them also have a tool for installing and removing the balls in ball ends. This is definitely handy to have. Again, fairly cheap on Amazon. Having some sort of pick is really handy. You can just get cheap dental picks on Amazon. They're great for pulling gears out of the inside of differentials and a lot of other tasks. Some sort of flush cutters or wire cutters are great for cutting the ends off of zip ties. I think it's fantastic to have a roll of 3M double-sided VHB tape. You never know when you're going to need to tape something down or retape something down, and it's just really good to have on hand. And then something you may not need, but definitely will want eventually, is a power tool. This is an old no-cry driver. Unfortunately, they don't make these anymore, and I don't have a suggestion for a specific driver to buy. They come in all different shapes and sizes. I do recommend trying to get something with a variable speed trigger and something with a clutch that you can turn down so you don't risk stripping screws out. Again, this isn't necessary to get started, but as you get further into the hobby, you're going to want something to be able to at least remove screws more quickly to save both time and wear and tear on your hands. upgrades. Obviously, there are a ton of other tools you can buy, but a basic kit like this will definitely get you started. Going back to potential failures, these are complex electric, electronic, and mechanical devices, and we put them through a ton of abuse, which is why sooner or later, something is gonna break. Of course, when something breaks, you could just pay somebody else to fix it, but, and I might be biased on this, I think working on the vehicles is just as fun and just as important as going out and bashing them. Even if you never work on a full-size car, the skills you can learn working on one of these little guys can really apply to a bunch of different things in your life. And because this is just a toy, if you break it or mess it up, it's really not that big of a deal. Covering every mechanical part on this car is beyond the scope of this video, but let's go over a few things. Being a pretty typical RC car, we do have a bumper in the front, a shock absorber with a spring and oil inside. We've got an axle shaft here that transmits power down to the wheel. The wheel connects to this wheel hex here. The steering mechanism is behind it. And then inside here, we have a differential that allows your wheels to operate at different speeds for going around turns. Moving back, we have a center drive shaft going through the middle. This delivers power to the front of the car. That's being powered by a center differential here. Not all cars have a center differential, but most modern larger cars will. That allows power to be split between the front and rear and helps absorb shock loads on things like those jump landings we were talking about a few minutes ago. That's mechanically powered by the motor, which is powered by the rest of the electronics. In the rear, we have a very similar setup to the front with a differential, axle shafts, and a hex that the wheel attaches to. The beauty of a car like this is that all of these parts are available individually or in small kits, so if something breaks, you can fairly easily replace it. And most modern cars, especially from companies like Arrma and Traxxas, are relatively easy to take apart. For instance, to get this center differential and motor module out, all we have to do is remove the ESC and servo module in front of it. I'm going to be using a 2mm bit on these screws. Fortunately, Arrma does mark which screws you need to remove with these little dots. While these 4 screws are identical, screws for RC cars come in all different shapes and sizes. And when you're taking one apart, it's a really good idea to stay organized. You can do that by putting things in baggies and labeling them, taking pictures of where they came from, or even getting a small piece of cardboard and poking the screws through the cardboard where they go in the chassis especially, and that'll help you keep organized. The biggest thing though is just to go slow, take your time, and make sure you know where things go so you're not frustrated when you go to put it back together. With those 4 screws removed, we can take this module out, but actually it's not quite wanting to come out yet. This is a very common thing to have happen when you take some screws out and then you think you're going to be able to take the thing out and it won't come out. This is an easy thing to fix though. We can see we have wires coming out of this ESC that go under these 2 little straps right here. And then on the other side, the servo is actually connected to this servo arm. The trick with any of these repairs is just to take your time, have fun, make sure you're paying attention to where things go, and if something doesn't work like you expect it to, just look around, see what it might still be attached to, see what went wrong, and just move on from there. Again, the biggest thing to remember is these are toy cars, this is a hobby, and it should be fun. We just need to remove a few more screws. But as you can see, this driver doesn't work in this screw because it takes a larger bit. Switching over to the 2.5mm bit, we can get those screws right out of there. And now after removing this center drive shaft, this power module comes right out. For more details on how to remove things like this, check out my other videos where I've done complete upgrades on the Granite and done full teardowns on pretty much every car that's come out in the last couple of years. But now that we have this power module out, it's time to talk about upgrades or option parts. What I have here for this Granite is an upgraded motor mount brace, a bottom chassis brace, some upgraded hinge pins, and some 17mm hexes. There are 2 main reasons why someone would want to install upgrades or option parts. The first one is because they find a deficiency in what they already have. Maybe you're breaking something over and over and you want to stop breaking it. Wanting to increase the performance of your vehicle falls under that category as well. The other main reason, and one that I think is equally valid, is that upgrades are cool. Does this motor plate need to be upgraded? Probably not. But does this motor plate look sweet? Absolutely. Of course, now that I'm looking at this, obviously this isn't going to fit in here. And this is one of the downfalls of upgrading. I just simply ordered the wrong part here. Nothing wrong with that though. It was still good for the experience of pulling this apart and showing you what it's like. So we'll just put the stock parts back in. You can also sometimes run into a similar situation when you upgrade with cheap parts, because a lot of times cheap upgrades don't fit properly. And it's also not super uncommon to have upgrades that end up not working with each other because they were both designed to work with the original part. Now, as I'm putting these screws back in, I'm gonna go ahead and put some thread locker on this screw. Thread locker is basically a glue that you put on the threads of the screw, and you use it to make sure the screws don't back out when you're threading into aluminum or steel. When you screw into plastic, the plastic works as sort of a lock nut, so thread locker isn't necessary, but you do need need it for aluminum or steel, otherwise your screw is going to back out on you. One final thing to talk about before we put this back together is setting mesh. This is setting the spacing between two gears in your car. I'm not going to get too far into this as I have an entire video on setting mesh. Definitely take a look at that video when you're done with this one. As far as when you should do upgrades on a car, my recommendation is, especially if you're new, just buy the car, go have fun with it, and then replace or upgrade things as they break. Of course, upgrading is definitely a big part of the hobby, and some people will want to upgrade just for the look of things. As you can see, this M2C brace is very pretty. It does also serve a purpose though. Sometimes these chassis can break, and the brace will upgrade the chassis as well as keep everything nice and stiff in the driveline. But again, especially if you're just getting started, I'd recommend focusing on replacing things as they break and then upgrading as you learn what kind of upgrades you will need for your kind of bashing. The last thing I want to mention as I'm reassembling this car is be really careful when you're putting screws back in. I'd recommend putting them in by hand. Again, make sure you've got good tools. And especially when you're screwing into plastic, make sure you go just until the screw stops and maybe a tiny bit more. It's really easy to strip out plastic, and then you're going to be replacing more parts. Earlier I said that I thought the Granite was a great first vehicle, or a great vehicle for just about anybody, and I still say that because it's just an awesome general all-around vehicle, but what you choose is down to you, what you're comfortable with, what your budget is, what you want, what you think looks cool, and what your comfort level is with taking risk on things like off-brand vehicles from Amazon that might not have the same parts support as something from Arrma or Traxxas. Ultimately, I'm not going to tell you what to buy because these are toys, it's a very personalized thing, and you should just buy whatever you enjoy, whatever's within your price range, and what you think will be fun. It's kind of hard to go wrong these days. There are a ton of options for bashers. Again, this Granite is fantastic out of the box, but something like the Omni Terminator is also a really good option. There are just a few more things we need to go over before we end this video. The first one, of course, is how to win the MIP giveaway. All you have to do is make sure you're subscribed, like the video, hit that hype button if you think this video was educational and entertaining, and then put any comment down in the comments section. That'll get you entered to win, and someone's gonna win an awesome set of MIP bits, which is gonna be great for getting your tool set started or updating what you already have. Now, there's just one more thing we need to talk about, and it's one of the most critical things in this hobby. And that is, what do we do when the fun is done and it's time to put everything away? For your car, you can just leave it dirty if you want. I usually wash my cars, blow them off with compressed air, and then put them in front of a fan to finish drying. Assuming your car is waterproof by the manual, you can do that too. But much more importantly, what do we do with the spicy pillow? These batteries do degrade over time, and that degradation results in a reduced capacity. How quickly that degradation happens, though, depends on how you store them. If you store them fully charged, that degradation will happen a little bit faster. But if you store them at about 50% charge, or storage mode, that degradation will happen more slowly. A common misconception is that storage mode is some sort of special mode that the battery goes into. It's not. All it is having the cells at about 3.8 to 3.85 volts each, which is around 50% charged, and that's the state of charge at which the degradation happens the slowest possible. All modern battery chargers will have a storage mode in them. Depending on whether your battery is discharged below that half charge point or charged above it, it's either going to charge it up or discharge it down. If it's charging it up, it'll do that just as quickly as it would if you're doing a normal charge. But if you're discharging to that storage voltage, a lot of chargers are going to do that really slowly because they're just bleeding that energy off as heat using resistors inside. If you're doing a lot of storage discharging, I recommend getting a dedicated discharger. This BD250 can discharge to storage voltage a lot faster. And while it's not cheap, it's very convenient, again, if you're doing a lot of storage discharging. Once you've got your battery at storage voltage, which is something I recommend doing if you're not going to be using it for a few days, you can leave it fully charged if you're planning on using it pretty soon. But what you definitely don't want to do is leave it fully discharged, because that self-discharge can actually bring it below that dangerous 3 volts, and then you might have a junk battery. For actual physical storage of your batteries, I recommend getting some of these ammo cans. They're pretty cheap, and all you need to do is remove most of the seal, leaving the part above the latch so it'll still latch properly. This will allow gas to escape in the event of a catastrophic battery failure, but it'll contain that that heat and fire inside the steel case so you don't burn your house down. With that being said, the vast majority of LiPo failures occur during charging and discharging or use, which is why I recommend grabbing one of these, a bat safe. This is specifically designed to contain a LiPo fire, and if you use that while charging or discharging or even storage charging a battery, it'll keep you much safer than just charging on your carpet. I do want to reiterate though that in this hobby, LiPo fires are relatively rare, and they're almost always the result of improper use or handling, or someone ignoring the warnings of impending failure and continuing to use a battery they shouldn't continue to use. As long as you use high quality batteries and you treat them well, the risk is very low. But what do we do if we find we have a battery that does need to be disposed of because it got physically damaged or has another problem? Classically, a lot of people have said to create a bucket of salt water and put it in that salt water. The salt in the water is conductive and it should discharge the battery. However, this is controversial, and some people say it will actually corrode the terminals off the cells before they're discharged, and you'll get the impression you have a discharged battery, but it'll still be charged and still be dangerous. You can also buy one of these. This is known as a LiPo killer, and it basically has a small resistor in it that just discharges the battery using that resistor to burn it off as heat. I personally use something very similar. This is a 24-volt car headlight bulb that I've soldered an XT90 onto. You can do something like this if you're comfortable with soldering. If you use a LiPo killer or one of these bulbs, when you're done and you're certain it's discharged, leave it for a few days or a week outside just to be absolutely sure. You can cut the connector off, twist the wires together, making sure they don't spark so you know that it's dead, and then you can dispose of the battery however your local municipality tells you to. Your other option would be just take it to your local hobby shop and let them deal with it. Not all local hobby shops will do that though, so you'll just have to call them to find out. What I don't recommend is taking it to a place like Home Depot and just dumping it in their LiPo container. If you're getting rid of a LiPo, chances are it's because there's something wrong with it, and you really don't want to set an entire container full of lithium batteries on fire inside a building. If you don't have any of those options available to you, just call your local municipality and they'll tell you what to do with it. And with that, guys, class is dismissed, but there's homework. I want to hear from you. I'm sure I didn't cover everything. I don't know everything and I can't remember everything. So let's share everybody's best tips and tricks for having a great time in this hobby down in the comments. You're going to do it anyway, so you win those MIP tools, so might as well make it worthwhile. And then when you're done, check out this video.